Welcome back to Sunrise Daily. We are talking about tackling corruption now. We're joined by Professor Patrice Lumumba, who is a former director, Anti-Corruption Commission in Kenya, and is the director, Kenya School of Law. Thank you for coming on this morning, Prof.
Thank you for the invitation.
You know, when we talk about corruption, people describe it in different ways because their understanding of it in some cases appears to be different, to the extent that maybe government agencies and the people, in most cases or sometimes, not necessarily on the same page. Do you have this kind of challenge in Kenya where people say, no, what I did, this is not corruption, this is just a normal thing?
I think there is a sense in which we try to rationalize corruption, but we all know what corruption is. If you are traveling on the road and you give money to a police officer to avoid prosecution, that is petty corruption. If you are in public office and you use public office for private gain, we know that is corruption. So it is an attempt to give a veneer of legality to corruption, that we pretend that we do not know what corruption is, but we do. And we know who are thieves, even in our traditional society. So those who engage in stealing what that does not belong to them are engaging in corruption. And I've taken the view that in many African countries we pretend to not to know the obvious because we have embraced things that undermine our very being as Africans.
You know, you've given several speeches about corruption. I think I came across one where you say you were not supposed to be fighting corruption. You were supposed to be, perhaps this seen to be fighting corruption. What were you trying to say at the time?
What I was saying is very simple, that in many African countries we create institutions, but we don't intend to have those institutions do anything. We think, for example, many African countries are signatories to the United Nations Convention Against Corruption and the African Convention for the Prevention and Combating Corruption. But what we do is to simply sign those documents, but we don't believe in them. We don't believe in them. And when one is appointed into office, one is supposed to earn one's salary, one is supposed to appear to fight petty corruption. But when you begin to attack corruption where it hurts most, particularly amongst the political class, then they say, this man is now going too far. He's coming too close to us. And the net effect, therefore, is that we corrupt our entire political system. And one of the most important things that we must know, as long as the political system is corrupt, a country can never be liberated from corruption. I give a number of examples. In the recent past, we have heard about the Panama Papers, and the Icelandic Prime Minister resigned on the ground only that there were allegations that he was named as one of the individuals. Contrast that with South Africa, where there is a finding that the president is engaged in activities which amount to corruption, and the president sees nothing wrong with it, and his supporters see nothing wrong with it. I give the South African example because it has been quite prominent. But you can talk about almost all African countries with few exceptions. And that is why Africa continues to punch below our economic and political weight, because we have a bunch of thieves in charge of our national resources.
You know, Professor Lumumba, I'm happy you're looking at it from the context of us as Africans, and you also talked about the being that makes us Africans and how over the years it is un-African to do what we see people do today. But if you look at this, can we get any example from any of the leaders? A case in point here, some would say, let's talk about Joseph Magufuli of Tanzania. Is he one of those people you think is leading the way as to the best practice in terms of good governance and how to fight corruption?
Even before Joseph Magufuli, we have President Ian Khama of Botswana. The Botswana have been leading in the fight against corruption. And if you go to Botswana, you are able to see that when a country and its leaders choose the path of rectitude, then the country realizes our potential. We can also talk about the retired President Hifikepunye Pohamba of Namibia, who during his tenure was in the forefront in the fight against corruption. And much more recently, everybody has been enamored by the energy and the enthusiasm with which President Magufuli has declared the fight against corruption. It is early days yet to give a judgment on whether he has succeeded or not. But he has telegraphed his intention, and one hopes that he will remain on that course and that he will recruit others who will help him in the fight against corruption. One of the most dangerous things in Africa today is to declare that you are going to fight against corruption. Even if you are the president, corruption is such an enterprise that there will be no shortage of individuals who want to liquidate you and to eliminate you altogether, because corruption is a big industry. People pay school fees, people enjoy good life on the basis of corruption. So that those who have declared themselves to be in the forefront against corruption, like President Magufuli and your own President Buhari, must know that they are on the line of fire. And they can be eliminated anytime.
Professor, he's been noted as speaking, he's given very strong statements on corruption. He says corruption is something that we talk about, is something that even the corrupt acknowledge is a bad thing. But the irony and the tragedy at once is that those who engage in corruption love it. The tragedy at once is that those of us who do not engage in it directly accommodate it. Now, considering, you know, the strength of these words, do you think that Africa can ever fight corruption successfully?
You know, it's not going to be easy. What I view as the impediment in the fight against corruption is that there is a sense in which in many African countries we have even ethnicized corruption. So that if an individual who is corrupt is arrested in a multi-ethnic country such as Nigeria or Kenya or the Democratic Republic of Congo, he or she will recruit people from their ethnic group and say that he is a thief, but he is our thief. So that there is a sense in which if we are to fight corruption successfully, the political leadership in Africa must, in the nature of things, demonstrate that impunity will not be tolerated. And I think it is not going to be easy, but it can be done. Why do I think that it can be done? In this country, Nigeria, during the short period that Nuhu Ribadu was in charge and President Obasanjo was on his side, the fight against corruption was moving apace. In the early days, and there are early days still, of President Buhari, he contested the election on the basis of fighting corruption, and he was embraced by many Nigerians, and one hopes that he will continue on this trajectory. In Tanzania, we can see the unanimity and the enthusiasm with which Tanzanians have embraced President Magufuli. It is not going to be easy, but it can be done, because the dividends of a corruptless society are so obvious that if we don't embrace them and understand them, then we are not getting the right thing. But it's not going to be easy. Remember that the bulk of the people in Africa, particularly in political leadership, have their lives based on a corrupt foundation, and they do not want to let it go.
How would you suggest that leaders handle criticism, especially leaders on the forefront of the anti-corruption agencies, when they're accused of ethnicizing, you know, those who, you know, they are facing, as it were, or politicizing it? Like in Nigeria, the accusation is that only one political party is being persecuted, if I'm allowed to use that word. How would you suggest they handle such criticisms?
I think what one must do is, in a manner of speaking, be sensitive to the realities of the day. The truth is that thieves are thieves. If you start with one political party, then that is the beginning. You must start somewhere. And this idea of apportioning political blame to one side and saying that it is only one side of the political divide that is being dealt with is not an issue. The question that we must ask is a basic question. Have you been engaged in corrupt activities? We investigate you in accordance with the law, and if we find you to be culpable, then you are dealt with in accordance with the law. And in the fight against corruption, it is also incumbent on those who are in political power to ensure that nobody is treated as a sacred cow. One of the things that we must note about African countries is that African countries are very fragile. We may talk about democracy, but in a country such as Nigeria, which is multi-ethnic, we may deny it all we want, but there are still Igbos, there are still Yorubas, there are still Ibibios. In Kenya, whether we like it or not, there are still Kambas, there are still Kikuyus, and that is the reality of Africa. And it's a reality which cannot be ignored, because we are still in the process of trying to create and strengthen the states, and one has to be sensitive therefore.